Chris Collier. I'm the Executive Director of Renew Theaters, and our organization manages the County Theater, Ambler Theater, Highway Theater, and Princeton Garden Theaters. So I want to thank all of you from each of our theaters for joining us. And if you're not in the immediate area, welcome as well. This program is sponsored by the Vesta Fund, which allows us to make it free for our members. And just this fall, we got an additional grant for the Vesta Fund, allowing us to expand this program. And we're excited to welcome Gettysburg College, the Majestic Theater in Gettysburg College as part of this program. So welcome any members of the Majestic as well, and anyone who happened to stumble across this on the internet. We've definitely had some people from the TCM boards before, and I hope that you're all ready to discuss this film. Before we get into this title, just a couple notes on upcoming films. We have a couple more films in our fall series. We've had a number of titles this fall. Our Asian American film series continues this upcoming Monday, the 15th, with a discussion of The Farewell. And that will be led by May Nagai at Columbia University. It's an incredible film, and I encourage you to join us for that. And then Henring Vraj from Gettysburg College will be leading us through the German film Dark Valley, which is a sort of spin on a Western revenge genre set in the Austrian Alps. So that's a really interesting title as well. And that is the Monday following on the 22nd. And then in early December, I really want to just say that for those of you who have not attended any of our Middle Eastern film screenings, it has been a very incredible conversation and really interesting films. There are 2 films left in that series. The next is the Afghani film, Osama, and really encourage anyone to check that out and be part of that conversation. The films are definitely outside a lot of our film knowledge areas. I had not seen any of them before this, and I'm really enjoying seeing all these new films and the discussion led by from that moderator. You can find all of the upcoming films on our website, deepfocus.film. And the last thing I want to note is, as French Dispatch is in theaters, we have made all of our Wes on Wednesdays series. So that's all 4 of our Wes Anderson discussions free on YouTube. So if you want to loop back and check out any of those, or want to share those with anyone who didn't get a chance to see them and who wants to get in the Wes Anderson spirit, there's some incredible conversations there with a lot of wonderful critics and film scholars looking at Wes Anderson's films. So you can find those on our YouTube channel or on Eventive, where you found the link to this. All right, that is all about the upcoming films. Most of you know all the protocols that we ask everyone to remain on mute, especially during Hannah's talk in the beginning, and then we'll open things up to conversation. If you do have a question, please raise your hand or use the raise hand feature. And I'll start by moderating the conversation. And then as things get a little more free flowing, we can jump in and just have it open up a bit more. And also the chat feature is enabled, and there's often a very lively sidebar conversation in the chat. So please make use of that. Share any favorite scenes or anecdotes or jokes, or as you're searching on IMDb, as many of you do during these, throwing in all the facts and references so that we can pull those into the main conversation. So it is now my pleasure once again to turn things over to Hannah Jack. For those of you joining us for the first time, Hannah is a writer for Turner Classic Movies and has scripted many of the introductions that air on the network and delivered by the many hosts. We are so thrilled to have Hannah leading us through this series of classic Hollywood films, and I would like to let you all know that we have just signed up for a whole another year. So we've got Hannah every month for all of 2022 as well. So you can rest easy that this will be continuing on, and we will have a constant flow of classic Hollywood films and wonderful discussion about them through all of next year. So with that, I turn it over to you, Hannah, and let's discuss The Third Man.
Great, thank you so much. Everyone can hear me okay? Great. It's so great to see so many returning faces and some new ones as well. I really I'm grateful for the turnout for this discussion. There's a lot to say about this movie. And very inadvertently, if you were joining us last month when we talked about the taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, I did not think that we would be doing back-to-back an entire fall theme of climactic chases through rat-infested sewers, but here we are. And I promise you that next month we will not be in a rat-infested sewer or tunnel. I have been in the habit of mentioning next month's title up at the beginning of this chat, so I'm going to keep that going. And next month, we're going to switch gears. Next month is, of course, December, so I would be remiss if I did not bring a little holiday cheer into the conversation. So we are going to have a holiday-themed movie. I like, whenever possible, to tie our film into something that's going to be on Turner Classic Movies, because I know there are a lot of TCM fans who join us for these. I can't really be specific, but there is going to be a fun theme going on in December that involves Hollywood couples, and I have written the introductions for all of those. And I've gotten requests from many of you for this one particular Hollywood couple that we haven't touched on yet this year. So fusing that with a holiday movie, we get the 1957 Katharine Hepburn, Spencer Tracy romantic comedy Desk Set. So we will be taking a look at Desk Set next month. That's going to be on December 14th. That's a Tuesday. It's a movie that I love with my whole heart. I think it's just pure joy, very, very interesting, and a great example of their later work. Lots to say about them. So I hope you'll join me next month for that. Bring your holiday cheer, because there's a bit of that in the movie too. But now for something completely different. Let's talk about this month's movie, The Third Man. So I hope many of you did, just by a show of hands, how many people got to see it on the big screen in one of the theaters? It's great. Yeah, so did I. And it was such a treat, I felt. I think whether you're watching this movie for the first time or the 20th time, or on the big screen for the first time, there's so much to mine from it. There's a lot to talk about in terms of the content, in terms of the style, in terms of the behind the scenes, the making of. And as usual, I'm gonna give you a bit of a lecture up front about the movie and how it came to be, and then we'll open it up for discussion. And I already see that the chat is lively, so I'm sure there's gonna be a lot to say. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen give me one moment here. Let's just get this so that you can see some visuals as I'm talking. Here we go. Does everyone see a movie poster as usual? Cool, great. So not just because of the dingy tunnel chase sequences, but I think it struck me as watching this that it's an interesting follow-up to the taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, because there's this very similar structure between a hero and a villain that we talked about last time, if you were with us last time, where the villain is very savvy and calculating and civilized and totally brutal, like Robert Shaw was. And this is the Orson Welles character, Harry Lime, is very much of that ilk. And you have a hero who's just a total bumbling idiot, much like the Walter Matthau character and Holly Martin's here. So it was an interesting follow-up. That wasn't planned. The reason why I planned this film for this month is because it's November, and a number of years back, a former TCM employee coined the term Noirvember, which has taken off. And if you're on social media, I'm sure you've seen it. Noirvember is an opportunity in the month of November to celebrate film noir. And I could have chosen so many different noirs, and this one is the one I picked, and it's kind of a controversial one because some people argue that it's not film noir. So we can talk about that too. Is it or is it not? But I would say that in the sense that it doesn't have so many of the stock characters that we associate with film noir. It's not, but certainly in its look, in its feel, in the time it was made in 1949 when film noir was really at the peak of the genre. And definitely, without question, the philosophy of this film, the very bleak outlook on morality and a very pessimistic view of the world. This fits right into the genre of film noir. It is also a movie that I chose because, let's be honest, it is on many people's lists of one of the best movies ever made. Certainly one of the best British movies ever made. And for a movie that's considered one of the best, it really had a very simple origin story. It's one of those movies that was kind of a happy accident in the way that Casablanca was a happy accident. Just all the right elements kind of came together. It wasn't planned as this magnificent, lofty, we're going to change the world kind of film in the way that a film like Citizen Kane was. It set out to be something different. The Third Man, just kind of everything came together. And it started out because this man named Alexander Korda had money trapped in Austria. Alexander Korda was the biggest producer in England. He was, in America, they had all these movie moguls in Hollywood, men like Louis B. Mayer, Jack Warner, Daryl Zanuck, all these people we talk about. England really only had one, and that was Alexander Korda. And he had offices all over Europe because he was just this major, major producer. And during World War II, the money that he was making, film distribution kind of came to a halt, and all of this money got stuck in these countries. And there were all these legal issues about getting it out of those countries back to England. And Korda said, you know what? The easiest, simplest solution is just to use the money in these countries and make movies there. So he had some money in Austria and had taken a trip to Vienna after World War II and saw what Vienna looked like after World War II. He saw this bombed out city that had once been this glorious cultural capital. And he thought it would be an ideal setting for a film, and he had money there and he needed to make a movie there, and that's why The Third Man happened. So he turned to two men to make this movie he had just worked with, two Englishmen. On the left is director Carol Reed, and on the right is one of the top writers in England in the 20th century, Graham Greene. And they had just collaborated on a film, a thriller from 1948 called The Fallen Idol. And that was produced by Korda. That was a British production. And Graham Greene, if you know his work, a lot of his work was adapted for the big screen. It lent well to being made into movies, but he often didn't like those movies that were made out of his work. He loved what Carol Reed did with The Fallen Idol, and the two men were very, very eager to work with each other again. So Alexander Korda went out to dinner with them and said, can you work on another movie, but put it in Vienna? I see like a thriller. Let's set this thriller in Vienna. And Graham Greene had an idea that this story has gone down in like film lore. He had an opening line of a story that he'd never written, but he liked the opening line. Basically about a character who buried his friend named Harry a week ago and was stunned to see him walking around in the Strand in London a week after he thought he had buried him. So that was the inception of the idea. A guy thought his friend had just been buried, and then he sees him walking around. And Alexander Korda, the producer, said, great, take that to Vienna and go to work. So he sent Graham Greene to Vienna, and this is in 1948. So the war had only recently ended. And Graham Greene went and explored Vienna and what it looked like for 2 weeks and kind of soaked it all up. He saw the divided power structure of the city. He saw the rubble everywhere. He learned about the sewer system underneath that connected all the different sections that was policed by its own police force. And he took all of that and he went and he wrote a novella called The Third Man that ultimately was published right after the movie premiered, but it was really a film treatment. And he wrote this story. And the script for the film really was not just Graham Greene writing it. He worked very closely with the director, Carol Reed, to write the script. He just came up with the story, the framework for it. Now, as I said, these were two Englishmen, Graham Greene and Carol Reed, making a film for a British producer, Alexander Korda. It was meant to be a very British production going into it. And the two men who were originally considered for the cast were Noel Coward as Harry Lime, which would have been interesting, and Cary Grant as Holly Martins. And that was what was originally thought of, and that changed early on in the process when Alexander Korda partnered with an American movie mogul to boost the distribution of the film in America and have more financing for the project. He partnered with an American producer we have talked about here and there named David O. Selznick, the man behind Gone with the Wind and so many of the Hitchcock movies in the 1940s. And Selznick was a notorious micromanager to the point where he often drove certain people crazy. One of them was Cary Grant, and Cary Grant walked off the project when Selznick became involved. And so that opened the door for someone else to be Holly Martins. And Selznick had some actors under contract, and this was an opportunity to put them into the movie. So he put Joseph Cotten, who was under contract to him, in as Holly Martins, and Alida Valli, also as Anna, the refugee, who's in the center of the kind of love triangle in this movie. They were both under contract to Selznick. Now, when Joseph Cotten was cast, the obvious choice then became to cast his good buddy, Orson Welles, as Harry Lime. If you know Orson Welles movies, as I'm sure they've come across your radar, Joseph Cotten was in a lot of them. They worked together from the time they were in New York in the 1930s. Joseph Cotten was one of the co-founders of Orson Welles' Mercury Theater. And Welles brought him out to Hollywood to kind of kickstart his career with Citizen Kane. So they were very, very good friends and relished the opportunity always to work together. But by this point, while Joseph Cotten was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, Orson Welles was really a pariah in Hollywood. He had only made his debut a couple years earlier in the same decade, but within just a few short years, he had kind of shown the Hollywood bosses that he was not super reliable. His movies were not box office guarantees. In fact, they were more often box office flops. He worked over budget, over schedule, and he was just not the kind of artist who worked well within the studio system. So by this point in his career, by the end of the 1940s, Orson Welles was living in Europe, and he often was taking roles acting in other people's productions in order to make money to finance things he wanted to direct. So in this case, he wanted to finance a production of Othello, so he accepted the part of Harry Lime. Many people have assumed, given Orson Welles' magnificent presence in this movie and the really stylistic look and feel of the film, that Orson Welles directed some of it, and he didn't. He was very frank about that, and everyone involved agreed. I mean, this was Carol Reed's masterpiece. It was his hand on everything. And there is only one part of the whole film from the behind the scenes standpoint that Orson Welles contributed to, which was that one speech about the cuckoo clock, about how there were, under the Borgias, there was murder and whatnot, and they produced Michelangelo in the Renaissance. And this was all improvised by Orson Welles. That speech really is the moral, linchpin of the entire thing, and kind of explains the whole movie's outlook, and certainly Harry Lime's. That was Orson Welles' contribution. Still, I think it is clear that Carol Reed drew influence from Orson Welles' style of filmmaking as a director. I mean, a movie like The Third Man really couldn't have happened without a movie like Citizen Kane breaking the mold. So as I said, this movie was made in Vienna. That was the whole point. So it was shot on location, almost entirely on location, in Vienna, really capturing this, the darkness and the decay of this formerly grand city, and kind of the corruption that was real. It's in many ways, this movie is just a time capsule of history in this city in this moment. It was, I think this is just more shots of Vienna, but the location shooting for this film made possible two of the elements that I think really make this film stand out. One of them was the cinematography by Robert Krasker. He was responsible for making this look like a film noir, turning this into this dark city with bold shadows and the cobblestone streets that they had to continually wet in order to get them to glisten like that. The dramatic tilted angles, and that work that he did won the film its one and only Oscar. And I mentioned this, if you were with us for the Sunset Boulevard conversation a couple months ago, we talked about the camera work of that cinematographer, John Seitz, and just how remarkable of a look Sunset Boulevard had. And I said, it was nominated for an Oscar and maybe should have won, if not for the fact that it was up against The Third Man. And this cinematography, I think, is some of the best in movie history. The movie was incidentally also nominated for Carol Reed as Best Director and for its editing. Carol Reed lost the award to Joseph Mankiewicz for All About Eve, which was also up for its cinematography in the same year. The other thing that I think that shooting on location in Vienna enabled this film to have is that unbelievable score, which someone earlier, thank you, gave us a snippet of. The score is performed and composed entirely on one instrument, the zither, and it was composed and played by Anton Karas. And Anton Karas was discovered by director Carol Reed when he was scouting for locations in Vienna and found him in a tavern playing the zither. That was his job. He was a street musician. He led a very humble lifestyle. And Carol Reed heard this zither and was like, what is that? He had never even heard of the instrument before. And on the spot, hired him and took him to his hotel room and had him record any music he could come up with, even though Anton Karas had never composed music before. He said, just start playing. In the end, he brought him to England to record as much music as he possibly could on the zither. And that became the score of the film, including the iconic Third Man theme, which became an absolute runaway hit, inspired a craze of playing zithers, and was covered by so many different musical groups of all different genres, and made Anton Karas this ridiculously big star, set him on a decade long of touring around the world playing this music, which he hated, and he only wanted to go home. And finally, he did go home because he had made enough money to go back home and buy his own tavern and return to the lifestyle that he liked. But when you think about it, I think there's so much to say about this score. Vienna, the site of like Viennese waltz, like all this other music that is so Viennese that could have been used in this film, and it was such an unbelievable choice to go with this instead. The last thing that I'll say before we open it up for discussion is I just want to talk about this final shot in the film and how the movie ends. Graham Greene, the writer, wanted initially for the film to end on a more optimistic note a little bit, with Anna kind of coming away like this and then linking arms with Holly and suddenly like kind of paying attention to him, and then the suggestion that they would somehow connect. And fortunately, Carol Reed and producer Alexander Korda and David O. Selznick thought that that was just improbable given everything that had come before. And they decided to go with the ending that Carol Reed suggested, which was the ending that you see. And of course, when Graham Greene saw the finished product, he thought that was exactly perfect. And this was the only shot in the film, actually, that was not filmed by that cinematographer, Robert Krasker. This one was one of his assistants who shot this one. And it's one of the most kind of audacious and notable shots in film history too. There are so many shots in this movie that are worth unpacking, I think, too. And the last thing I'll say is just that this is one of those films that was very much regarded as a masterpiece in its day. It was not one that over the years has come to, be appreciated more, although that's certainly true too. It was a huge hit. It was a huge hit all across America and in England and everywhere that it premiered. Critics loved it, audiences loved it, and it did very, very well. So there's so much more to be said about this movie, but I want to stop talking and hear what you have to say and what your thoughts and questions are. I'm sure there's stuff that's come through in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and oops, did that went away? We're good? Okay, great. Okay. So what questions or thoughts do you have from this film?
Valerie?
A million thoughts.
Yes.
Too many for here. I put in the chat, and I'll bring it up here. To me, the zither acted like a Greek chorus. It's definitely a character, I think, in the film. Without, I mean, there's so many little pieces of music, whether it's the third man theme or just a little like kind of a squeaky thing. It just moves the action forward. It shades or colors what's going on. I guess, and I was intrigued with, Joseph Cotton, who's supposed to be this dime store novelist. Like, it's a nothing, like those things were fake. The authors of those books at that time didn't live in the West, but they dreamed it up and they painted a picture of the West that wasn't real. And so much of this isn't real. Like the devastation is real, but who they're trying to be isn't real. Harry's not really who everybody thinks he is, or who Anna thinks he is. I don't know. There's just so much. I'm going to be quiet because other people, more learned people than me, should talk, because I'm just going to blather on. So
no, I absolutely, I agree. I think that your comment about it being a Greek chorus is so beautifully said, and I think that that's so true, that the zither kind of comes in with like the vibe of whatever. It's used very ironically a lot, and it's used very much to emphasize a certain emotion in different moments.
Remy?
Yeah, I'm really curious about the conversation or the argument about whether or not it's a film noir, because it really it looks like one, but it doesn't feel like one. And I've never considered it a film noir, but I'm wondering where that stands with you and what you would classify as to me, a film noir is narrated, and it has a lot of the other, plot elements that they're pretty much, most of the film noirs I've seen have had the same sort of plot points and the same types of characters. And this feels very different in a lot of ways, but it looks like a film noir. So I'm wondering what your take on this film in particular is in terms of categorizing it.
I certainly have opinions. I want to hear what all of you have to say, and I'll guide it by saying that film noir, it has always kind of been debated as, is it a content kind of thing or is it a style kind of thing? So jump in. What do you think, people who are interested in noir and want to weigh in?
I think it is a film noir. It just has a much bigger budget and a time schedule to film than most of the film noirs, which is why it looks so different, even though it has the shadowies and stuff. It has the hero who's pulled in. It has the morals of a film noir, with somebody you think is a friend turns out to be the enemy. I think it's a film noir. It's an elevated film noir, but it certainly fits the genre.
Other thoughts? John, I'm going to call you out because I know you're such a noir fan. What do you think?
Well, Eddie Muller thinks it's a noir, so that's good enough for me.
Eddie Muller hosts Noir Alley on Turner Classic Movies, yeah.
If it looks like a noir and it feels like a noir and it has the ethos of a noir, it's a noir. I mean, noir obviously covers a broad range of different types of themes and plots. They're not all detective things, but this to me is absolutely a noir. One of the all-time best.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, anyone else want to weigh in on noir?
So much of it has to do with the philosophy, like I said, the ethos of the film, and it having the look and feel of it as well. It has also been seen, though, as a precursor to the spy movies that became so popular a couple decades after this. And interestingly, there are some connections between The Third Man and the James Bond franchise, in that director Carol Reed's assistant on The Third Man was Guy Hamilton, who went on to direct 3 James Bond movies, including Goldfinger. And Bernard Lee, who played the captain, I guess he is, who gets killed in the tunnel at the very end, played M in 11 Bond movies, and that was his most famous role. So it's interesting how this kind of set the tone for kind of what it was informed by a lot of espionage from the war too. Graham Greene was a British intelligence agent during the war, and he knew spies, and so in Vienna, and so he was very much in that world, and so that's another genre that it is often linked to.
Brian, your hand is up.
And Bernard Lee played Sergeant Payne, and I thought he was.
Thank you, Sergeant.
I thought he was brilliant in this, and because the only other thing I had seen him in was the Bond films as M. I think the film can also be looked at as the differences between post-war America and post-war Europe, because you got Holly Martin, who's naive and optimistic. He's just jumping at this job in Vienna. He's looking at it like another adventure. And it takes a lot to break through that naivety. He is convinced that Harry Lime is innocent until Major Calloway spends like an entire evening presenting him all this evidence in this montage. And even if he's still not quite sure, he shows him the human cost of what Harry Lime's doing, and that's what finally flips him. So that's the American post-war optimism. We won, we're on to new things, while all the European characters like Anna, the Baron, Dr. Winkle, are trying to do what they feel they need to survive. And they're in these ruins. Their way of life is gone. They're being, Vienna's occupied by 4 different countries. It's a mess. So I just thought that was an interesting theme that was going through the movie.
Yes. I love that. I think that that's such a great distinction. Yeah. And Graham Greene, when Joseph Cotton was cast, Graham Greene really colored the role. It became these 2 American leads instead of these 2 British leads. And Graham Greene had this anti-American bias. And so a lot of the stupidity and ineptitude of the Holly Martin's character came from the fact that was Graham Greene wanting to show how dumb. I mean, the fact that he's a pulp writer who can't give a lecture on writing, and written by this very acclaimed British, learned writer, was his like dig at the American abroad too. Yeah. But I love that distinction. That's great.
Risa?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. To me, it also had a feel of a Hitchcock movie in certain ways. And not only was there the drama, but there was the humor. There was the fact that that guy knew his Joseph Cotton's book. There was the little kid. There was all the animals, and the fact that the finger got bitten, and all those, the tension relieving comic elements, along with the other, more the darker stuff. So that it had a sort of a feel, and I wonder if Hitchcock had made any comments about that movie. And one other thing before maybe you can answer that. I think it was a really good choice not to cast Cary Grant, because in the final scene, it would have been unbelievable for her to not have walked off with Cary Grant.
Fair. Agreed. Yeah, I think that's a great point about it feeling Hitchcockian, and it has been noted by a lot of people that there is that kind of similarity. I think that the British do something unbelievable with like melding darkness and humor. They're so good at it. And Graham Greene really did think of this as a comic thriller. That's kind of how he categorized this movie. There's a lot of comedy in the movie, but that was kind of how he imagined it. And a quick pitch for Joseph Cotten and Hitchcock, because I know that Shadow of a Doubt, the restoration, is coming. I'm coming to the county. Is it coming elsewhere too?
I was just going to jump in and say
Yeah.
that if you want to see more Joseph Cotten, that tomorrow night at the county we have the restoration, and then next week the 18th it's going to be at the Garden in Princeton.
Great. Of Shadow of a Doubt, the Hitchcock
Yep.
movie with Joseph Cotten. Yeah.
Okay, one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
William?
Yeah, something that struck me about the movie, and somebody mentioned in the context of noir the idea of narration. I imagine this is something from the novella, but the movie starts off, it really kind of pulls you right in right away with voiceover narration, I think from Major Calloway. And it's this very, I've only seen it once and I didn't take notes, but it's kind of funny. There's we hear something about amateurs, it doesn't go so well for them, and there's a body floating in the river.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, and I wonder if it's partially a product of the adaptation, that this seems to be narrated not by one of the protagonists, by more one of the sort of supporting characters, and that voiceover doesn't ever really come back, but it's a really effective way of kicking things off. It's also weird, like the delivery is quite casual, and if I recall properly, it's almost like, I wanted to tell you about this guy that came to town, right? Like it has this very kind of like the whole thing is an afterthought or kind of casual, which contributes also to the mix of tones that is so skillfully managed in the movie, that it starts off almost kind of funny and a little throwaway.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that opening narration. That's actually the director, Carol Reed, whose voice you hear in the opening narration. And it's not ever connected to a specific character, but I love that you assumed it was Major Calloway, because
it was from
there are
that's what I thought it was, yeah.
Right, it has a similar voice. Yeah, it's Carol Reed. There are certain moments in this movie that are never explained, right? Even the logistics of the third man being there and how this body was dealt with and the switch and whatnot. But you kind of just go with it because it's set up so well. But that was, yeah, it's a lot that I think leaves you with more to think about as you watch and as you kind of piece it together.
There's one question that just came up in the chat regarding the narration, saying, could you say something about the British version had a different narrator?
Yeah.
I don't know, Anne, if you wanted to comment on that.
I think what you're alluding to is the fact that micromanaging producer David O. Selznick had his own cut of the movie that he cut something like 11 minutes or something out of it. Because he wanted to make it more of a less politicized, like a more Americanized and less like dealing with the European vibe. He cut it in a way that was not adding anything to the movie by doing so. I'm blanking on who was narrating. It might have been Holly. John, yeah.
Yeah, no, this is a really interesting part of it. It was Holly.
Yeah.
Because everything Selznick did in doing an American version was to make Joseph Cotten, the American, a hero.
Look like a hero, right?
We're seeing, of course, the British version. The American version is completely discredited now because it completely undercuts the genius of the Graham Greene and Carol Reed, which is that what I think Brian was saying originally, that it's a really interesting that it's the American is the innocent, and it's sort of what you were saying, that Graham Greene, did not like Americans. He thought we were, naive and blundered into things, the quiet American. It's so genius the way it works that that Holly is also sort of the stand-in for us as the audience, as he blunders into trying, he's always a step behind, trying to figure out what's going on. And, German is being spoken, which we don't understand. He's confuses Major Calloway, calls him Callahan. He says, I'm English, not Irish. And he makes that mistake. He calls Dr. Winkle, calls him Winkle, who says it's Dr. Winkle. And that, just sort of picking up on what Brian was saying, it's so densely layered, all the nationalities and ethnicities that are there. Anna is trying to be Austrian, but she's from Czechoslovakia. Popescu is Romanian. There's just all of these different confusing nationalities and ethnicities that are swirling around, that Holly has no idea that that's going on. And that makes the film so deep and resonant.
Absolutely. And that's what, and Selznick wanted to, as you say, exactly, simplify it and make Holly seem much more of a hero. He also wanted, he was famous for writing memos about what he didn't like, and he would just like bombard the director with these memos. And so many of them are, have to do with how the actors under contract with him were being presented on screen. He wanted Alida Valli to be in these glamorous, he's like, what's with her wardrobe? Her wardrobe is so plain. And he wanted her to be in these glamorous gowns. And Carol Reed said, like, why would she be in this, in the midst of all of this decay and ruin? Like, that's so fortunately they ignored most of his memos, but he did cut it in his own way for the American audiences. Yeah. I saw a comment about the Hitchcock connection too, about throwing the main character into a lecture situation. That was a Graham Greene personal experience that he had, that he was asked to lecture by some government agency, and they didn't like his lecture and decided to cut his wages in half for it. And he was pissed off about that. So he decided to put them and cast them in a bad light, that they were kind of stupidly organizing this lecture for no reason that nobody seems interested in.
Risa M. Yep, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. I find that I have to extend a lot of poetic license to believe the Holly character. The American economy is booming, and this naivete, to me, it speaks to the American denial of the inner life, and it somewhat implicates Holly in a unconscious willingness to want to participate in something untoward, as much as he might deny really knowing who the person, his friend Harry, really is. He is pulled into that. So I'm thinking that these two characters might be different aspects of one character.
Yeah.
And also I'm interested in what people have to say about that, and also about the theme of the movie. I don't know myself, but does the cuckoo speech encapsulate the theme? Thanks.
Yeah, these are such great points that you're bringing up. I'd love to hear what people have to say. That the two sides of the same character, the names being so similar, Harry and Holly, so much that Anna even confuses them all the time, is an interesting thing to think about too. And definitely, I think, just to tie it back to our conversation about, is this noir? One of the tropes of film noir is that a character knows what's bad for them and goes for it anyway, and deals with reaps the consequences of their decision. So in that sense, if Holly is going, head first into a situation, knowing that he talks about how Harry Lime used to get in all kinds of trouble and always did all kinds of questionable things, and he knows what kind of character he's getting involved with. But that is so much of Harry's that is so much of what makes this character kind of a larger than life figure anyway, is that all these people are drawn to him. And, you know, casting Orson Welles, I think, was such a brilliant choice because he has that charisma to pull it off. But what do you think? I mean, about this idea of them being, I mean, did anyone feel like you had to suspend your disbelief to go along with the ride, that Hollywood would go there and find this job and go through this? Yeah.
I didn't have to suspend my disbelief because he seems to be wholly unsatisfied with being the author of these pulp novels.
Mhm.
He's looking for something else, and he's almost looking at, you can look into it, that he views this new job as him going into the Wild West, him living his own adventure. I mean, the two characters are could be, you know, they are mirror images of each other in a way. And I think Holly is going because he knew Lime in college, and what he was getting into was like college trouble as a kid. He could write it all off. And he just walks into this naivety, but I didn't have a problem believing it.
See another hand, yeah. Is there? I see Walter, a hand raised over there.
Yeah, it looks, I think Polly is next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, yeah, this was to some earlier conversation, so I don't have anything specific on that. Although I do think the moment he grows up is that last look. We haven't talked about the last shot yet. That's a whole other point I wasn't going to make, but when Harry looks at him, they exchange that really quick glance, and then he shoots him. That's kind of like the end of the naivete, I guess. What I was going to say quickly about the Hitchcock is also the whole MacGuffin kind of parallel with the issue of the third man. It kind of doesn't matter, but it drives the plot.
Right.
And also the unusualness about the whole thing being called the third man, and you know it's Orson Welles, and yet it takes him forever to even get in the picture, which is sort of a weird reverse parallel, like of Psycho in a way, of killing off the main character. But anyway, the other thing I wanted to say was how much I loved Trevor Howard, and he really centers and grounds the whole film, and Bernard Lee, I suppose. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Thanks.
No, these are such great points. Trevor Howard plays Major Calloway, a stalwart British actor had a very long career. And if you haven't, just another movie to check him out in, if you haven't seen, I'm sure many of you have, Brief Encounter is one of the great love stories of cinema, and he was the romantic lead in that. So if you want to check out another Trevor Howard movie with him in a different kind of role, although still very much Trevor Howard. And the point you're making about Orson Welles coming in so late in the movie, that was something that really appealed to Orson Welles about playing this part. He talked about it as he described this kind of part as the star part, meaning that it's not how many lines you have or how much screen time you have, it's how much everyone else in the movie is talking about you. So by the time, I mean, there's not a scene in this film where Harry Lime is not mentioned, and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. And that was a big draw for him, was to play that kind of character. And he really couldn't escape that character even after the movie. He continued to reprise the role on the radio. There was a very popular radio series that began just a few years later in the early 1950s, where he, like 50 some odd episodes, many of which Welles wrote, where he played Harry Lime in like the prequel to The Third Man. So like all of his early adventures, and he continued to play that part with the theme music being connected to the radio series as well. But what do you think? I mean, Orson Welles in this movie, we haven't talked about yet. So what do you think, in terms of the shots of him, as you were mentioning, Polly, that last shot, there are so many great shots of him too. What do you make of Orson Welles in this movie? Take that in any direction.
If I could call on Justin. Justin wrote a wonderful comment on the Orson Welles reveal scene. Did you want to comment on that, Justin?
Oh, sure. Put on the spot. I'll just sort of recap what I said. So forgive me, my film technique terminology is terrible, but I really did get chills when I rewatched the movie and for this at the Harry Lime reveal shot, because it's kind of, I mean, obviously like he's completely obscured out of the light, but then he gets revealed, and then you get in tandem, you get the camera doing, I don't know, I can't remember if it's a rack shot or a zoom or what, but the camera just sort of focuses in on his face, and then you get like this very wily, like very Orson Welles-esque grin from him, like almost a Cheshire Cat grin or something. And it's just got such a playful spirit to it that I think just I mean, it really contributes. It really does something. I think what makes it such a great reveal, and maybe one of the great character introductions in movie history, is it really does add to his mystique in the moment too. Like it's revealing something, but at the same time, it's adding to everything that you've been hearing about him, all this chatter you'd heard about him. It's like, oh wow, there's this playful bit sinister. And just said, I mean, that's totally right. I agree.
And
that
was
balloon guy also. Sorry.
The
balloon guy adds to it.
Yeah, the that moment with the cat was Carol Reed's invention. That was not, Graham Greene did not. Graham Greene wrote the reveal with the light. That was in his original treatment of it. But the idea, and someone was mentioning the animals before, Carol Reed apparently was an animal lover, and so all these animals are worked in. He liked working with animals in movies, and it was his idea to have the cat be part of that whole introduction too. Yeah, see some other hands too.
Amazing.
Walter Singer? Or is that's the name you have listed?
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my husband. I'm Kathy.
Hi.
My computer doesn't work well with Zoom, so, but I wondered if you could comment on the scenes at the end in the sewer. I mean, and the last, the fingers coming up. I mean, the diminution of this character from when he first appears, and how he is looming so large in Anna's mind and in Holly's mind. And at the end, he's running through the sewers like a rat being chased. And he, you see these fingers coming up. That's just a chilling scene. And I'd like to know more about that aspect of the film. And the other comment I wanted to make is that the juxtaposition of humor and horror in this film reminds me a lot of Fargo, because it has that same, I mean, it's such horrible things are going on, and yet it's so funny. Yeah. And how they do that. So that's all I had to say.
Interestingly, in this movie, the horrors that you were supposed to imagine are not shown. Carol Reed had this beautiful idea to show Joseph Cotton's expression, seeing the children's beds instead of seeing, leaving it to our imagination.
Right. Well, also the nuns, just the way you see those weird habits that the nuns are wearing, that's very scary in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah, the sewers was such a essential part of this movie too. It's an essential part of the landscape of Vienna in this moment too. Those hands are, again, Carol Reed's. They're not Orson Welles. A lot of people stood in for Orson Welles in this movie because he was not a well-behaved team player. So a lot of when someone was mentioning the big shadows that look like, that was a lot of times that was Guy Hamilton, who went on to be the James Bond director, in a big coat, being projected because Orson Welles just wasn't around. So those are Carol Reed's hands, actually, that you see there. But that, a lot has been said also about by people who look at this movie a lot, about the juxtaposition of this moment on the Ferris wheel in the highest part of town being where Orson Welles kind of justifies his crimes and talks about his moral philosophy and all this. And then, so that's at the uppermost part of the city, and then how he's brought to justice at the lowermost part of the city in the depths of the sewers. Orson Welles did not want to film in those sewers. As soon as they got there, he was like, no, you crazy? This is horrible. We don't do this in American films. He was finally persuaded to hang out there and do much of the filming. Some of it was recreated in a studio in England, but most of it was shot in those sewers. Again, a lot of it with doubles for Orson Welles. Oh, and I'm sorry, one other comment about the, had come up before about that shot with Welles looking at Joseph Cotten, at Holly, with that like kind of please shoot me moment at the very last that we see of him. There were a couple of lines that Graham Greene had written into the original script to make it more explicit that this was a mercy kill, that Holly was doing this as like a favor to his friend, which changes, I think, you can interpret that from Orson Welles' look, or you could interpret that Holly is, making a conscious decision to get rid of this evil. It's kind of left a little bit more open-ended, I think, but in the original script, Graham Greene thought of it as a mercy kill. So that's hinted at there too.
Yeah.
I just wanted to briefly go back to the reveal and Orson Welles. His eyes are so expressive that he doesn't even need to have to say anything, and it's not just in that scene, in many scenes in movies he's been in. And that just really struck me, just like the look in his eyes just goes right through you,
Absolutely.
And that scene in the Ferris wheel, the tension that's created in that scene had me almost not able to follow that speech, because I was just like, oh my gosh, is he gonna toss Joseph Cotten out? Like, what's gonna happen? And I was really tense, like physically tense throughout that whole scene, and it went on pretty long.
Yeah.
So it was, I wanted to ask you about that, like what, obviously I think that's more the director, than the actors really creating that through a lot of other means other than the speech.
Yeah. Well, I think it has a lot to do with the camera work, going from that card looking down. It has a lot to do with how Harry Line's character is built up before we even get to encounter him, really. And this was one of the only moments where he's in the film for any length of time. So he's been built up to be such a corrupt, sinister figure who's responsible for so many confusing things. And so adding to that moment of what is going to happen here when he's really with us, I think is part of how that character gets developed.
Yeah, with the tension and the fact that the Ferris wheel was still standing after all the bombing is incredible too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a symbol of the city too. The Prater Ferris wheel was part of the Russian sector, so it was viewed as like an opportunity for the Russians to kind of like rejuvenate the city. It had a lot of political ties to it, that particular symbol, that particular location.
Yeah.
Risa?
So one thing I don't think we've really talked about tonight is the relationship that the girl has with the two men.
Yeah.
Which I think is important. And there was a lot of tension in that. His wish, the Joseph Cotten character, his wish to kind of to replace his friend in that relationship. And the fact that she, in walking out of the cemetery, goes straight forward. You get the sense that she really did love the Orson Welles character and really had a lot of conflict about it. And it was really, it added a lot to the film to have that triangle, I think.
Speaking of the genre of the film, in some ways, this is just a love story and a love triangle too. Brian, yeah, I saw you respond to that.
Oh, just one last James Bond connection in the film. That Ferris wheel is in Timothy Dalton's first Bond film, The Living Daylights. So just another little tidbit.
There you go. Great. Yeah, that does anyone else have anything to say about the love triangle there or her character?
Valerie?
Valerie. Oh,
Oh,
Valerie,
you're on
you're
mute, Valerie.
muted.
Yeah.
Unmute.
There you go.
In my mind, when she walks down that pathway in the cemetery and she just goes right by Holly, she's had it with both of those men. They both used her, abused her mentally, at least, maybe physically, who knew? Well, not Holly, but she's had it. And so it's like tough luck on all, like I've had it. I don't even think I'm going to give you the time of day. I'm done. I'm like washing my hands of this stuff. So I commended her for that, because it's in a time, I think, when you had to rely on the man. Like, that man's just got to see me through. And I don't mean to not having a man in your life, I don't, but I was just glad to see she had the strength and courage to say, that's it, enough's enough, and I'm moving on. Tough luck on both of you, and yeah, I had thought of something else too, but that fast it went out of my head. So
No, there's so much to say about this movie, really. I know.
Absolutely.
We could be here for another hour easily. Yeah.
Mhm.
John, you had something?
Yes, just sort of agreeing that end scene. This movie has one of the all-time great beginnings with a voiceover, and one of the all-time great endings. That shot lasts over a minute long, and just her walking past like that is so amazing. And then there's like another 20 seconds of him standing there lighting a cigarette, and then the fade out, and it's really extraordinary. But we had talked sort of about I think you said, Anna, the moral center is kind of his speech at the Ferris wheel. But there's another really strong moral point that has to do with Anna, which is when she is about to be sent off in the train and realizes what's going on and refuses to participate in that. And Holly says to her, "Oh, Anna, why do we always have to quarrel?" And Anna says, "If you want to sell your service, I'm not willing to be the price. I loved him. You loved him. What good have we done him?
Mhm.
Look at yourself." They have names for faces like that. And then he sort of looks away, and then the camera comes back, and you see the swinging door of the cafe there. And then the shot comes down, and you see his coat, which she's thrown off.
Yeah.
So she's rejected what he's doing,
Right.
but she ultimately rejects, says at one point that she doesn't want to be with Harry.
Yeah.
But she still has some sort of loyalty and love, which she thinks is important. And that's kind of, I think, a point that the movie's making also.
Absolutely.
About loyalty.
Yes. And I think that absolutely so many of these characters, I mean, not so much the Holly Martin's character, but the other main players here, including Trevor Howard, have a sense of what they think is right and wrong, and like where they draw a line that nobody's drawing the same line anywhere.
Right.
But yeah, and that really speaks to, I think, kind of the broken down system of like what it looked like after this war. I mean, what was going on in the years after, Auschwitz and Hiroshima, and this is where the world is, and kind of everyone is trying to figure out where their morality kind of is, which is why I also say this movie is such a time capsule. I think it's really one of the great time capsules of a place in history, in a really interesting
And I think that's what, you're absolutely right. And so many of us tonight have made such great points about that. And I think that's what makes this such a classic film.
Yeah,
it has
absolutely.
such emotional and moral depth and complexity. There's great humor, there's great noir, but at its core, it's about morality and different points of view, and it's really an amazing movie. Not to mention one of the all-time great scores.
Yes, which I will have in my head for the next year. Yeah, I think, and again, what a happy accident that all of these things came together to make this movie what it is. It became so much bigger and better than anyone could have thought. So I know that we're just past the hour here. I'm so grateful to all of you for bringing these incredible insights to this movie. Certainly added to my understanding and appreciation of it. Chris, was there anything else that we wanted to wrap up with?
The only thing I wanted to add is a number of people have put in the chat asking questions about Alida Valli's career, and just some questions about that. So if we could just answer those, because it's popped up a couple different times, then we can wrap up.
Yeah, she had a very long career, mostly in Europe. At this stage of her career was under contract to David O. Selznick in Hollywood. He thought of her as the next Ingrid Bergman, and he was kind of grooming her in Ingrid Bergman's image. And she was in the Hitchcock movie, The Paradine Case, and some other films of this era. The Miracle of the Bells with Frank Sinatra and Fred McMurray. She's in that in terms of Hollywood movies, but not a ton of Hollywood movies. Much more of her career was spent working in Europe in a real wide range of roles for a wide range of decades too. So definitely check out more of her European work if that interests you too. Especially in the movie Senso. That's a great film that she made with Farley Granger with an Italian director. So lot of work that she did, but not as well known because not as much in the Hollywood sphere.
May I make one final point?
Yeah.
The Swiss do not make cuckoo clocks. That's been commented on. It's such a great, it's one of the all-time great cases. The cuckoo clocks are not made in Switzerland.
Great. So yeah, I hope that you'll join me next month for something completely different when we talk about Desk Set. It's a great, happy end to this year. A great opportunity to talk about one of the great screen teams of all time, Hepburn and Tracy. And certainly if you have other Hepburn and Tracy films that you love, we can talk about those too. It's so great to see everybody, and I hope you'll join me again next month, December 14th.